All right, it looks like numbers have ticked up, so I think we're all set to go here. Again, for those of you who might not have heard, my name's Mickey, here from Coalition, actually north of the border today, joining you from just outside of Toronto. Really excited to be here and host this session. The cyber market is constantly changing. Start of this year, we'd probably say that the market is changing every month, and now it seems like there's changes almost daily uh, when you think of the claims experience, when you think of capacity. So today, we're really excited to talk about Coalition, tell you more about our story, what makes Coalition different. This is obviously an extremely busy time of year, so we appreciate everybody taking the time out of your days. And let's jump right into it. Quick introductions. We've got Blair joining from New York. She's on the business development team. Rich Gatz is our claims counsel, handling cyber and tech claims day in, day out. And myself, Mickey Ho, representing Canada on the business development team. So apologize if you hear my accents. I'm sorry. I am working from my house today. And I'll tell you all about Coalition as we go through this, a few Canadianisms for you there. We're all probably very, very familiar with Zoom at this point. Just want to point out a few things that you should see on your screen. We've got our chat feature. If you have any questions, please feel free to send them through to the panelists. We will try to answer throughout the session. We've also got some time for Q&A at the end. As well, there is the Q&A section. If you want to have a more public discussion with us, please feel free to send those at any time. We will pick up on them as we go through. And again, we'll have some time to address anything that's still outstanding at the end. Very briefly, just to highlight our table of contents for today, Blair's going to tell you a little bit about Coalition's story, how we were founded and why we were founded, what makes us very different. And we'll hand it over to Rich to talk more about our claims and incident response approach to those things. And then again, we'll have some time for Q&A. I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Blair here, and excited to have you here again. Thank you for everybody for taking the time.
Thanks for the intro, Mickey, and to everyone on the line, welcome to the webinar. So as Mickey mentioned, I am in New York, so apologies if my New York accent comes out. But today I'm going to go through Coalition's story, and I want you all to understand how Coalition came to be, and then I'll get into some of the differentiators of who we are and what we offer. So I want to tell you how Coalition started. Our CEO, Joshua Mata, was one of the first people in the CIA's post 9/11 cyber warfare team. He was recruited by the CIA because he was a boy genius who sold his first company to Microsoft at only 15 years old. He spent many years in the CIA and then in the equity world. He then looked around the cyberspace and said, why is no one doing anything to mitigate cyber risk? And that's really where the idea was born, to form an insurance company that was actually an insurance and a tech company that did something for the insureds to mitigate risk, as opposed to just providing them with a reactive insurance policy. So 4 years ago, when Josh had this idea, he created Coalition. So if we go to the next slide, this shows who we are. We are an insurance-driven tech company that keeps companies safe from cyber risk. We're an MGA that's backed by Swiss Re as our main carrier partner, which earlier this year, we just announced a long-term partnership with them. Our other carrier partners include Lloyd's, Arch, and Argo. Our product launch was January 1st of 2018. We can write business on a primary and excess basis in the US and Canada, of course, for companies up to 1 billion in revenue. We have a very broad appetite with only 5 classes of business that we won't write. And those are your usual suspects of cannabis, casinos, adult entertainment, payment processors, and data aggregators. We have 18,000 policyholders, and that is growing every single day. Over 200 employees, which is also growing exponentially day over day. Our employees have extensive backgrounds in the insurance space, coming from places like AIG, Aon, and Chubb, and extensive security and technical backgrounds with prior employers like Amazon, Google, and some of those 3-letter governmental agencies. Earlier this year, we announced another round of funding of $175 million. That brings us to a total of $300 million. An evaluation of about 1.8 billion. This round of funding will allow us to expand our footprint into different geographies and products as well. So that's basically the story of Coalition. And now if we go to the next slide, I'll get into some more details. So what you see on the slide here is our feedback loop, which is kind of like our secret sauce to underwriting cyber. We feel as if we do it so well because we are basically a data aggregator in which we use that data to underwrite differently and more effectively. We're using data to predict claims and improve our incident response and claims response. By turning this data into intelligence, it means our pricing is more competitive, allows us to offer higher sublimits on certain coverages that our competitors won't. As the market continues to be challenging and our competitors are cutting limits, reducing coverage, adding co-insurance, and so on and so forth, we haven't been in that position, and that is a testament to our feedback loop and turning our data we collect and applying it into our day-to-day work of solving cyber risk. So on the next slide, this represents innovation across the entire value chain as we expand. At Coalition, we talk about our key differentiators, and one of the main ones you'll see in this first spot is distribution. Our brokers have the ability to quote, bind, and issue a policy on our platform all within minutes with access to online customer support as well. You can think of it as insurance as a service. Next in this value chain is our product. We have a very broad insurance policy, again, backed by Swiss Re, that's continuously being updated with enhancements. We also have a slew of endorsements that's available on appropriate risks when necessary. We're able to keep coverage broad because of that feedback loop we just went over, but I'll go into more of the coverage later. Third is how we underwrite. We have Signal's intelligence system that automates collection and underwriting of information. We're running a large-scale, continuous global data collection operation that's all non-invasive. We are aware of security exposure and vulnerabilities and learn how to underwrite to them. We're scanning our potential insureds, all from an external and passive perspective, and our policyholders from this external perspective, as I mentioned, to find vulnerabilities and their open doors. So you can think of it as the insured and their network is a house, and the scan is the robber, all on the outside. None of our scanning is invasive, it's all outside in. We underwrite as if we're adversaries. If we can see something, so can the bad actors. Next in this value chain is risk management. The data collection allows us to monitor aggregation risk and exposure and allows us to actively manage our policyholders' risk as well. And last but certainly not least is claims, as we have our own in-house claims team and incident response team, which enables us to respond quick and drastically decreases the cost of claims that are coming in. Rich will talk about this in more detail later. On the next slide, we're going to start going into our differentiators a little bit deeper. So I mentioned our signal intelligence. This serves as the foundation of our feedback loop. Think of this as the external passive scan that is run in the background when you're quoting an account on our platform. From our signals intelligence, underwriting capabilities, and risk correlation and modeling, we're able to quote with contingencies, or decline an account within minutes. We're able to produce a cyber risk assessment, which is essentially a report card of all the data and findings from our external scan that's run at the time of quoting. This risk assessment is produced and available for brokers, insureds, and potential insureds on all of our accounts, regardless if they bind coverage with us. The signals intelligence allows us to proactively alert our policyholders of critical vulnerabilities that we find and prevent incidents, as we are constantly scanning policyholders' attack surfaces when they do bind coverage with us. The last piece, and certainly not least, is our value-added services and recommendations. On the next slide, this provides a screenshot of something that you would see on our broker platform. As I mentioned, brokers are able to quote and bind a policy within minutes on the platform. I also mentioned that we have an online chat function that connects you to real people on our team. Over 98% of our broker interaction is facilitated via the online chat, and the average response time is less than 5 minutes. If you have questions on what a risk should be classified as in terms of industry when working through an account, you can chat our team. If you need to update the address on a policy, you can chat them, and so on and so forth. If you have any questions, you can ask them. And these are real humans, you're not talking to a robot, so Coalition employees will respond to you in that chat function. You're able to quote with the limits and retentions that you want and see the pricing in real time. So if you go through the process of quoting a 1 mil limit and then realize you only need a 500K limit, you can change that and get that updated pricing right away. The other thing I didn't mention is that we only ask a few questions on our platform. We don't require lengthy apps that I know are floating around in the market that we all know too well. We don't need to ask questions like, do you have a firewall? And that's because we already know that from the security scan. On the next slide, you can see all the coverages broken out that we offer on our policy. This includes everything from first and third party coverages like network and information security liability, regulatory defense and penalties, multimedia, PCI fines and assessments, computer replacement or bricking, breach costs, and so on. We're one of the only carriers that offer some of these enhancements like bodily injury and property damage, as well as pollution. So next we'll move on to talk about more of our risk management platform on the next slide here. So this allows our insureds to measure their risk just like we do. This populates information from our continuous scanning of the assets and risk factors associated with each organization. The risk assessment represents a snapshot of a company's risk at a moment in time. We provide actionable insights into risk, many of which can be implemented at no cost or with minimal investment. Our insights are directly tied to risks that we know adversaries are looking to exploit. This report can be downloaded on demand through the policy term and will show a company's progression of their cybersecurity posture. With our continuous scanning, we have automated notifications to insureds and brokers of our findings, what the issue is with them, and how they can fix them. And last but certainly not least is our services on the next slide. And what you're seeing here is our advanced scanning technology that we offer on our middle market accounts. The data points and graphics are examples of us being able to map out the risk to show them what their vulnerabilities may be. As mentioned earlier, we have our own in-house incident response team that provides pre and post-claim services. To relate this to something that everybody should be familiar with is if we were an auto insurer, this would be the equivalent of owning the repair shop, except our repairs are better and less costly. And just some statistics, 45% of pre-breach events are resolved at no cost to the insureds, and 84% of stolen funds are recovered by our incident response team following funds transfer fraud event. And then if we go to the next slide, just to talk about some feedback. This lists real feedback and some statistics on our Net Promoter Score. And compared to the insurance industry average, you can see that we are much higher. And on the right-hand side, you can see quotes. These are from real brokers and policyholders. I like the one where it says, "We are gobsmacked." Definitely not a word that I use in my everyday vocab, but I think it really speaks to Coalition and what we have to offer. Another one that really sums it up is, responses are always fast, quotes are even faster. Coverages and risk management services are great and innovative. You've done many things to improve the cyber market as a whole. And with that, I will pass it over to Rich.
Good afternoon, everyone. Rich Gatz, Claims Counsel at Coalition. Brief background around me. I don't know if you'll hear my Chicago accent. I've been living in Ohio for the past couple of years, so it might have went away by now. But I do have a tendency to talk pretty quickly, so please let me know if there's any questions in the chat and we can answer them. I am an attorney by trade. I started in private practice and then moved to professional liability and financial lines claims about 13 years ago, and then started doing privacy and technology subject matter based claims in 2013 because I was the only person in my entire company that knew what a Bitcoin was. So a little serendipitous there. Since then, I've been focusing more and more on privacy and technology related subject matter for insurance, and have been at Coalition for over a year. I'm going to be discussing our claims differentiation. And so I think it's important to understand what my background is. So when I say that we do things differently, I'm not just saying that because I'm pitching Coalition to you. It's because I have experience working in the claims departments of several multinational global insurance companies, handling cyber claims, handling professional liability claims. So I know why we're different and what our differentiation is. Next slide, please. So one of the things that I think is really impactful for our claims differentiation is just how much less claims activity we have. As you can see here, and we don't have numbers yet in the marketplace in 2020, but I would expect that number to be significantly higher given the post-COVID network environment. But you'll see that we have a much lower claims frequency, and this is attributable to, I think, our security team, our underwriting, the way we underwrite risk. Just by passing the underwriting process, your clients are much less likely to be hit by a cyber incident. And that is because of how we aggressively underwrite and evaluate risk for a coalition policyholder. And the other reason for that too is we have a significant and substantial pre-claims function, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But essentially, the Cliff Notes version is we can leverage our internal incident response team to help diagnose a security failure or data breach on behalf of our insured. And if there is not a security failure or data breach, we actually don't open up a claim. So with other carriers, you would have to report a claim, retain breach counsel and forensics, and potentially erode the entirety of the retention and potentially also erode part of the limit of liability. Whereas at Coalition, if there's not a breach or security failure, it's just a pre-claim service that the insured doesn't pay a cent for. Next slide, please. And again, that is the perfect segue into our in-house claims and incident response team and these pre-claims function that I mentioned just a moment ago. 45% of the claims that are matters that are noticed to us, we actually resolve on a pre-claims basis. And again, and this is something that does not impact the insured's retention, does not impact the limit of liability, does not end up on any loss runs. It's something that we do to help service our insured and to help mitigate their risk, because we want our insureds and our broker business partners to notify us of everything. Okay, we can't help if we don't know something. So we want to be the one that's helping them assist and determine if there is an actual security failure or data breach. A typical example of this is an insured's client gets an email purporting to be from the insured, but it's from a spoof domain. Okay, typically that's indicative of an email compromise on one end of the correspondence, or it might not be, but we don't know. The insured hasn't seen anything particularly suspicious in their email accounts, but they notice us. We engage one of our incident response and email specialists who will do a complete review of their email tenant, look for any suspicious logins or hidden rules or anything of that nature to determine, has there been an email compromise? And if there has, then we can fire up the Death Star and do a full forensic investigation under the auspices of counsel to protect privilege. But if there's not, then the insured knows that they're not dealing with an email compromise. They can go to their client and say, hey, we know that we've not been breached. And again, not incurring any costs under the policy, not incurring any losses on their loss runs. But you also see that and I think this is probably the second differentiation that I'm most proud of handling claims at Coalition, and it's how proactive we are. We are a startup, and I say that in all the best of ways, in that we're agile, we're dynamic, but we also aggressively handle claims for the benefit of our insureds. And the best metric of this is how we've been able to assist our insureds in recovering 84% of funds that have been stolen from them via a fraudulent funds transfer or wire transfer fraud. And the way we do this is when an insured or broker calls the Coalition Claims Hotline, you are speaking to a claims person. It's not a third party. It's not, I mean, it might be our customer success team or, if for some reason there's some overflow, but 99.99% of the time you're speaking to the claims person who will be handling that claim. And we have certified privacy attorneys and claims professionals that can triage and assist from moment one. I think the average response time between notice and talking to the insured from the Coalition claims team is under 5 minutes. And so because of this, we're able to put processes and procedures in place and assist the insured in notifying their financial institution, providing the proper forms to fill out to notify law enforcement. We have law enforcement partners at the FBI and Secret Service that we can leverage on large funds transfer claims to help freeze the funds, even in some cases, even before the financial institutions can. So because we're the ones answering the call, because we have this expertise, we start the process sooner than might be otherwise available for other carriers, which, as I'm sure you are aware, with cyber incidents, speed kills, right? Like speed matters. The way in which you respond to an event and how quickly you do so is indicative and determinative of a positive outcome. Next slide, please. And so you'll notice here on our incident recovery process that we actually include brokers in this graphic, and I love this. Okay, because obviously you have coalition claims because we're the ones handling it and we're going to be assisting the insured in recovery and restoration. You have coalition security, which can assist the insured with any security questions they might have, which by the way is free for all coalition policyholders. You have coalition incident response that can, assist on a pre-claims basis and also reduce cost, which will be another slide, for actual claims and cyber incidents that come in. But our broker business partners are an essential partner and tool in mitigating cyber risk. Oftentimes, an insured feels more comfortable talking to their brokers about incidents that may occur. And this is where you guys come in, you guys and ladies come in helping us help our insureds by telling them to notify us, telling them, hey, they have a pre-claims function. They can help investigate this for you. You don't need to stress or worry about noticing this to an insurance company if there isn't an actual cyber incident. Because unfortunately, we've seen a lot of instances where a ransomware event or business email compromise is not, you don't see it as it's not as black and white as you would hope, right? There might just be some data corruption on a file server. And that's a little weird. Okay, it's been working perfectly for 6 years and now there's some data corruption issues. We don't understand that. Well, something like that is something we'd want you to call the claims line. And so if you hear something from your clients or our insureds that tingles that spidey sense, tell them to report it. And by doing that, you can assist us in the incident recovery process and ultimately potentially reduce the potential exposure and liability an insured may face from a cyber incident. Next slide, please.
Hey, Rich, we just had a question come in through the Q&A from another Richard. Question, I think you sort of touched on this, but Richard asked the definition of claim. When should they report a claim or an incident?
Sure. So our policy actually defines both a claim and incident as separate. So a claim would be for third-party liability. So our policy has third-party liability for network security and information liability, which would be a claim arising out of a data breach, security failure, or privacy liability. Some policies have multimedia liability and others might have technology errors and emissions liability. So for a claim, the definition is a demand for monetary damages, a written or litigation, or a request to waive the statute of limitations. So essentially, if someone's making a claim against your client, you'd want to report that obviously as soon as you can. And even if there hasn't been a claim, but if there's circumstances that might rise to the level of the claim in the future, you'll want to report that as well, because our third-party coverage allows for the reporting of a notice of circumstances. And if those circumstances result in a claim at a later date, no matter how long away, then we can relate that claim back to when you reported the notice of circumstances under this specific policy. An incident is for our first party coverage. So that's the breach response costs, cyber extortion, business interruption loss, so security failure, systems failure, if there's been a public media relations event, or if there's something along the lines of where if the insured is being damaged, right? And so I always use this phrase like report early, report often, kind of act like you're voting in Chicago, right? Vote early, vote often. We want you to report everything. Okay. So if you ever have a question of, should I report this? Report it. Worst case scenario is you talk to a member of the claims team and they say, okay, well, we don't think this rises to the level of reporting, or we don't think that there's anything that we can do here, or unfortunately, this may not be covered under this policy. If it's something like a TCPA claim or disability discrimination notice or something like that. But we want you to report it to us because we'd much rather have that discussion early than have it later, right? So really report whenever you think that there might be coverage available under the policy. And don't be afraid to ask questions of the claims team and say, hey, is this covered? Is this something we should report? Because we'll be open and honest with you. And again, we can leverage that pre-claims function to do some investigation to determine, okay, is there a security failure or data breach ongoing on the insured's computer systems?
Great, thanks, Rich.
So moving along in regards to the benefits of coalition incident response. So they are a wholly owned subsidiary of 3-letter agency alumnus and leading forensic company alumnus that are some of the best forensic and incident response folks in the world, in my opinion. And that's from someone that has dealt with literally thousands of cyber claims. Not only do we do things just as good, if not better, I think better than other leading forensic firms, we do them cheaper because coalition incident response only works with Coalition policyholders at this point in time. And the goal is not to increase their profit margin, right? It's to assist our insureds. And you can see in this slide that we're seeing up towards of a 61% savings in ransomware claims for forensics. And the other benefit to this is when insureds choose to move forward with Coalition incident response, all of those costs are outside of their retention. They do impact the limit of liability. However, the insured does not pay any forensic costs when leveraging Coalition incident response. Next slide. So this is a case study that really kind of shows, that second differentiation I talked about in regards to funds transfer fraud recovery. In this instance, we had a nonprofit entity that unfortunately received fraudulent payment instructions. They had suffered a business email compromise, which allowed the bad actor to understand their business processes, who to email, and how to insert themselves into a payment transaction. And they unfortunately wired away $1.3 million to the bad actor. Now that number is important because there is only $500,000 in coverage for this policy. So if we're unable to assist the insured in recovering these funds, they're taking an $800,000 uninsured loss. And them being a nonprofit, that's not something that they could realistically handle. So as they found out that this was a fraudulent funds transfer, they notified us immediately. We were on the phone with them within 5 minutes and initiated the clawback of funds through our law enforcement partners and giving the insured the tools necessary to actually move forward with the clawback. Okay. And that's by, helping them contact their financial institution, telling them to fill out an IC3.gov report, and then forwarding that to our FBI contacts. About a week later, we got the good news that the funds were actually clawed back and recovered, all but $500 of the $1.3 million, which Coalition actually donated to the nonprofit. And this is really important because having worked at other carriers, even when we're handling on kind of this pseudo crime-based policy coverage, this fraudulent funds transfer coverage, which isn't, back in the day was not a typical cyber cover, we didn't do this. Okay, you would assign counsel and forensics to investigate the business email compromise, but you would let counsel advise on this, or you let the insured just kind of do their own thing. And that's not to say that that's necessarily bad, but what we do is better, right? And so I think it's really important to understand that when someone calls the Coalition Claims Hotline, they're speaking to an expert who's going to try to make things better from moment one. We're not transcribers. We're not people that are just going to, take something in, send it off to counsel, and then touch base in 30 days. We're going to be an active participant to mitigate that risk. And so we were able to help them recover these funds. And we also assisted them in remediating the business email compromise and then implementing 2FA to make sure it didn't happen again. Next slide, please.
Rich, one more question here that might be timely for this slide. Richard again asked a question. Is there an employee dishonesty exclusion? Obviously comes into play with crime-related coverage.
Right, there is not. We specifically cover rogue employees. So there is an exclusion, I believe, for intentional acts of a senior executive, but I think that's primarily in the third-party liability context. I don't have the policy right in front of me, so don't double quote me on that.
Thanks, Rich. Yeah.
No problem. And then, so the next case study is probably, it is one of my favorite things about Coalition. And there's a couple of times, even outside of the specific incident, that I want to raise. One, in this one, we had Coalition sends out vulnerability notifications to our policyholders. I think we've done multiple trillions of scans. And we identify critical vulnerabilities in their publicly facing network infrastructure. And so we send this out to the policyholder contact, or which hopefully is the director of IT, or the director of IT gets sent that information. And in this instance, we sent out an automated notification. The director of IT contacted us and worked with our security professionals to remediate the critical vulnerability. Okay. When I say this happens like all the time, it happens all the time. And it's really important. And this is also where we get buy-in from our broker business partners. And as often the notifications will also be sent to our broker partners to give them a heads up that we're sending these notifications to the insured. So if you ever do get a notification like this, please encourage your clients to take this seriously. I've unfortunately had a couple ransomware claims just this month where we notified of RDP being remote desktop protocol being open. The insured got the notification, unfortunately didn't do anything with it. And then a couple of days later, we're hit with a strain of ransomware. But, this is, one of a great differentiation for Coalition generally, but I'm not sure if you all remember or are aware of the Microsoft Exchange hack that occurred about a month or two ago. When that happened, we were able to scan our entire book of business for entities that had on-premises Exchange servers. Not only that, we're also able to see if there was malicious activity. And we went through and contacted every single one of those entities to assist them in patching and recovering. And a lot of this was done outside the policy limits as well. I mean, even our CEO, Joshua Mata, was on the phone calling insureds and walking them through how to patch their on-prem Exchange server. And that's just incredible to me, and really, epitomizes kind of the startup nature of what we do and how that can benefit our policyholders. Next slide. So again, you'll see right up here my favorite phrase: report early, report often. We really, really want you all to tell your clients to report claims to us so we can assist them. We can't help if we don't know about something. And oftentimes, like I said before, when there's a serious network disruption, it often begins with smaller disruptions or interruptions. So if there's anything kind of that tingles that spidey sense, please, please, please report it. You can call that number. I believe it's press option 1 for the claims team, and that pings the entire claims team. And we have individuals from Eastern time zone to Pacific, so we have countrywide coverage. If you want to channel your inner millennial and don't really want to talk to anyone on the phone, we have a claims email that goes to the entire claims team as well. And then we also have a chat function during normal business hours that goes to our customer success team, but they can ping the claims team fairly quickly.
Great. Thanks so much, Rich and Blair. Really appreciate the insights. I really love hearing both of you speak. Really different in terms of the skill set that we've built at Coalition. I'm going to take some time for some Q&A. We do have a few questions that came in. Rich, I'm going to put you back on the hot seat for a couple of questions. I think there's a lot of press about, cyber claims being excluded. There's a number that have happened over the past few years that have really hit the press. So we had a question come in: what would cause your policy to decline coverage?
Sure. So that's a very difficult question to answer in without more specific circumstances. But the number one thing would be if there's late notice, right? And so if the insurer doesn't put us on notice of a claim, their claims made in reported policies, then that would be an issue. So we really want our insureds and their broker partners to notify us of claims. Another common one we see is, professional liability. We're not a professional liability carrier at this point in time. So our policy, even if it has tech E&O coverage, doesn't have your typical E&O coverage or miscellaneous professional liability. Those two things are pretty big ones. I'm trying to think of something else. I think it's important to read through our systems failure definition. Generally, for the first party coverages to be triggered, you need 3 things to occur: a security failure, which is essentially any unauthorized access to your computer systems; a data breach, which is self-explanatory and doesn't necessarily have to be a result of data breach of your computer systems, but also systems failure, which would be the unscheduled failure of your computer systems. Now, something along those lines, it's important that read through the definition of systems failure. It's not a blanket coverage. It's only meant to cover when those computer systems managed by the insured or managed by a third-party service provider are impacted. So, that's something that we look at quite a bit. But generally, if there's a security failure or data breach or privacy liability, our policy would respond.
Thanks, Rich. And back to back, another question for you. Very important question when it comes to cyber. Obviously, the services, the response is a huge aspect of what we're giving to everyday companies that don't necessarily have the protocols and procedures in place. So question from Abby was, does claims handle the negotiation, or does that fall on the insured to do that?
So we would want to facilitate that, and we would facilitate that through vetted vendors. So our policy is pay on behalf. And I think that's really, really important in the cyber extortion / ransomware context, because we're not going to make an insured pony up a ransom payment. So our carrier business partners, we are an MGA and we're underwritten by various other carriers, would provide payment on behalf of the insured. So the way that negotiation process works is we would either retain a forensic firm that does the negotiations, and or a separate firm that only does negotiations. And we will make sure that they are licensed money services transmitter, money services business, and that they comply with all the banking regulations that are out there to defray any potential OFAC risk that the insured might have. And we would always recommend that the insured, if they do suffer a ransom event, never reach out to the threat actors, never engage with the threat actors. Unfortunately, we are seeing threat actors reaching out to insureds or their clients. I had a ransomware event where the threat actor has been basically cold calling the CEO over and over again. And as you can expect, that's fairly upsetting. So we don't want the insured to engage with the threat actors whatsoever. We will hire competent professionals to do that.
Great, thanks so much, Rich. And we've just got a few more minutes here, but we'll answer a few more questions that have come in. Blair, maybe one for you. Is Coalition Insurance rated AM Best or Demo Tech? Can you maybe speak to the carriers that we partner with and some of their ratings?
Yeah, absolutely. So as we mentioned earlier, one of our largest and number one carrier partner is actually Swiss Re. So in addition to Swiss Re, we also partner with Arch, Argo, and Lloyd's syndicates, who are all rated AM Best, A or A plus ratings. So that is, hopefully that answers that question.
I think it does. Thank you. Another question, maybe Blair, you can touch on this one, and I'm happy to jump in as well. We had a question, I'll just sort of summarize it. Some other of our competitors are requiring MFA on all accounts. How do we approach MFA? Would we quote without it? And more importantly, do we support our prospective policyholders in implementing MFA?
Great question. And we are seeing this question more and more frequently. So the high level answer is we are not outright declining risks if they don't have multi-factor authentication. We look at everything on a risk by risk basis. So it really depends on the type of risk, the security posture, and a lot of other security controls as well. So we are not outright declining accounts if they don't have MFA. So that answers part one of that question. And then do we provide resources and what do we have to help insureds implement MFA? One thing that Coalition has created is a cybersecurity guide. This is put together by many people on our team. And one of the main points on here is implementing multi-factor authentication. So in this cybersecurity guide, it talks about what MFA is, things to consider, and different ways to implement it, as well as vendor recommendations. And in addition to that, we do have our own in-house security engineering team who are available to policyholders and insureds to assist them in things like having conversations around implementing the multi-factor authentication. So not only do we have this cybersecurity guide, that's a great resource in situations like this, but there's also access to our security engineering team.
Thanks, Larry. I think those are important insights. As much as we're an insurance provider, we very much want to be a risk management partner as well. If we can help our policyholders improve their overall cybersecurity, we can help reduce our claims frequency, claims severity. So that's really ties back to our mission of solving cyber risk. Just taking a look through the other questions, I think we've got one more regarding the broker appointment process. So maybe I will touch on that one. Streamline broker appointment process. So on the screen, you'll see our getstarted@coalitioninc.com email address. Please feel free to reach out to that email address. We do work with wholesalers and retail brokers in the US. It is quite a streamlined process just to get going, and we can get you access to our platform quoting very, very quickly. So I know we're running up on July 1s right now, 7/1s. There's definitely still an opportunity to take a look at those with Coalition. So please reach out. Happy to have the discussion of how we can partner together and support your clients. Got another question. I'm not too sure who wants to take this one. If it's not Rich or Blair, I'm happy to take it. So we had a question: how outside of insurance, how do you different or conflict with independent risk security firms? So I think the question is really, we're offering security tools, security and risk management services. companies have their own in-house IT. They're using managed service providers. They're paying for services outside of what we offer. So how does that pair together? We'll hand that one off to Rich for his insights.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of different questions there in that, how do we do it pre-breach or pre-incident, and how do we do it post-incident? So generally, the coalition scanning process is outside looking in. So we underwrite as an adversary would and review as an adversary. So the question, we would definitely still want our insureds to engage separate cybersecurity professionals as needed. Post-incident, coalition incident response and our forensic partners are solely looking at investigating and remediating that incident. So it's not necessarily something where they're going to completely recreate the entire security footprint for the company. And oftentimes we will need to engage the insured's previously retained cybersecurity or IT consultants to assist with that process. You just want to be very careful when an insured is engaging an IR firm or breach response firm pre-incident, because there has been some recent case law that has invalidated attorney work product privilege for incident response firms that were engaged pre-incident. So just something to discuss with a client's external counsel about how best to protect any investigation that might occur while also maintaining their security.
Thanks, Rich.
Sorry, go ahead. I was just going to answer Johan's question around, he had asked, how does deductibles works in case of a claim? So our policy has a retention, a self-insured retention that would need to be applied prior to any payout of the policy. The one caveat to that would be when coalition incident response is concerned, is those costs are outside of the retention. So we would pay those costs from dollar one. All other costs would be the responsibility of the insured up to the retention cap.
Thanks, Rich. And I just wanted to circle back on the question about third-party firms and cybersecurity. We are establishing partnerships with some key vendors in the cybersecurity space. We recently announced our partnership with SentinelOne. We have a partnership with Malwarebytes. Both companies provide EDR solutions. We have a partnership with Curricula on security awareness training. These are all with the goal of helping our policyholders manage risk, and we actually offer discounts of up to 30% when using those vendors. So, even if companies are already engaging the services of those third-party consultants, third-party application providers, as a coalition policyholder, they would get a significant discount, which is, again, a key differentiator that we're offering in the space. So I think we're pretty much right up on time here. Again, if there's any other questions that come up, you can reach out to us at our getstarted@coalitioninc.com email address as well. We're happy to discuss an appointment and next steps around that. Just want to take this time to thank Blair and Rich. Really appreciate the insights and all your hard work in this space. Again, if there's anything that comes up, please reach out. Best of luck, everybody, with your 7-1s. We hope to be a part of those. And thanks again for joining us today. Take care.